The day my husband took me for a pregnancy checkup, he got a call from his old flame. Just a simple, "I miss you," and he left me standing on the curb without a second thought. I expected to lose it, to yell and scream at him, but I didn't. I just stayed quiet and calmly booked an appointment for an abortion the next day. But when my husband found out, he completely lost it, practically shoving his beloved out of his arms, begging me in tears to forgive him. Today was supposed to be the day Chris Blanchard, my husband, took me to the hospital for a pregnancy checkup. Halfway there, his old love, Fern Robbins, called to tell him her son had a high fever. Without any explanation, he told me, his 3-month-old pregnant wife, to get out of the car and drove straight to Fern's house, which was in the opposite direction. He left me stranded on a deserted road. The heavy snow that night had turned everything into an icy mess, and I slipped and fell. Pain shot through my stomach like 100 needles stabbing at once. A kind stranger found me and drove me to the hospital. I was so glad to hear the doctor said my baby was fine. After the checkup, I kept calling Chris, hoping he'd come pick me up, but he never answered. Call after call went to voicemail or a busy signal, but when Fern called him, he picked up right away. It reminded me of how things were before we got married. His phone was always on, always waiting for my call. I went home, my heart heavy, and just collapsed on the bed. Chris came back around 1 a.m., annoyed and muttering under his breath as he walked in. "You went to bed already? You didn't even leave the light on for me." I used to wait for him no matter how late he came home. And if I fell asleep, I'd leave the bedside lamp on. But tonight, I just didn't have it in me to care. I turned over, facing away from him and leave his questions on air. He clicked his tongue in irritation. "Are you serious right now? Fern's son had a 102-degree fever. If I hadn't taken them to the hospital, he could have ended up with brain damage. Show a little compassion, would you? Did you think about me at all when you left me on the curb in the middle of a snowstorm? Did you even care if I managed to get to the hospital or not? I'm pregnant, for heaven's sake. With our baby," I snapped. "Who's your wife, Chris? Is Fern so incapable that she can't call 911 on her own? Why does she have to ask someone else's husband to deal with her problem?" I kept going. Chris let out a long, exasperated sigh, looking at me like I was losing hold. "Don't be so petty, Elodie. Fern's just returned from England. Her British husband divorced her and she doesn't have anyone else here. I'm the only person she knows. Things hasn't been easy for her. Raising a kid alone is draining. If there's something I can do to help her, then I had to for her." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Then why don't you just divorce me and go be with her? That's what you want, right?" The more I talked, the more my heart hurt. I remembered the days before we got married. The Chris I used to know would put me first in everything when if I had even a slight cold, he'd be frantic, rushing me to the hospital, ignoring urgent calls from his boss in the process. But now he was like a stranger, indifferent and distant. Maybe he saw the heartbreak on my face because he softened a little, stepping closer and wrapping me in his arms. "Come on, don't be mad, honey. Forgive me this one time." "I swear I'll never do it again," he said softly, trying to soothe me. One of his hands slipped under my collar while his lips brushing against my neck. "I've missed you. It's been a while since we've done it." I slapped his hand away hard. "What do you mean a while? We just did it last month. The doctor warned me no more sex until after the baby's born or I could miscarry." All right, Chris muttered, clearly frustrated as he let me go. He grabbed his phone and whatever he saw made his whole face light up. His eyes went soft and gentle and he looked completely absorbed. I called his name, but he wasn't answering. It was like he didn't even hear me. While he was in the shower, I picked up his phone from the bedside table. To my surprise, he had changed the lock screen password. It used to be my birthday. After several failed attempts, I tried entering 1123 and it worked. November 23rd was the day his precious Fern Robbins returned from England after her divorce. I couldn't help but scoff as I unlocked Chris's phone, immediately seeing their message history. Fern's words dripped with sweetness. Her constant calling on my husband was getting on my nerves. "Fern, Chris, thank you so much for today. I don't know what I would have done without you if only you were Tony's dad. Chris, if you don't mind, let Tony call me dad. I actually quite like it," topped with smiley face. My heart sank, my whole body going numb. It felt like all the blood in my veins froze solid. Just then, a notification popped up. Another message from Fern. It was a voice message, just 2 seconds long. I hit play. A young boy's voice chirped, "Thank you, Daddy, Chris." I couldn't help but laugh, though it was the kind that laced with bitterness. Here I was, carrying Chris's child, and he was off playing father to another woman's son. I could still remember his promises from our wedding night, the vows to love me forever, to be loyal, to cherish only me. It had barely been 3 years, and those promises had rusted over. Chris stepped out of the shower, catching sight of me with his phone. His face contorted with rage, and he shoved me hard enough that I crashed to the floor. Pain shot through my belly, and I had to grit my teeth against it. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Ever heard of privacy?" I stumbled and hit the floor, feeling a sharp pain in my stomach. I gritted my teeth against the pain. Privacy? What about boundaries? I spat, struggling to get back up. You're letting Fern's kid call you dad? What does that make our baby? Oh, come on, it's just a godfather thing. Why do you have to make everything a big deal? He said coldly. He didn't even bother to help me up, staring down at me with annoyance. It's not like I'm leaving you to marry Fern. Isn't that enough for you? His words stung. My thoughts flashed back to 3 years ago when he proposed. He had looked at me with eyes full of warmth back then, his words sweet enough to make bees swarm. But now he couldn't even look at me without disdain, as if I was something he wished he could scrape off his shoe. Just as I was about to respond, his phone rang. I glanced at the screen. He had saved Fern's contact under a ridiculously affectionate Fernie. He picked up immediately, completely unbothered by my presence. Hey, Chris. Fern's voice purred from the other end. Sorry to bother you again, but Tony's been fussy all night. He says he misses his daddy Chris and wants you to come and read him a bedtime story. Chris's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. He didn't hesitate for a second. Ah, isn't he a cute boy? Well, I can't let him down, can I? All right, I'll be right there. Wait for me, Tony. Daddy's on the way. Chris. I called out, my voice trembling as he headed for the door, practically begging. Please don't go. Stay here with me. I sprained my ankle when you pushed me. It was true. My ankle throbbed with every slight movement, the pain shooting up my leg like needles. But Chris just looked at me, eyes full of disdain. Seriously, I barely pushed you. Elodie, stop being so dramatic. He shrugged on a fresh jacket, even taking the time to fix his hair in the mirror, and then turned to leave. I could feel my anger boiling. Chris, if you walk out that door tonight, we're getting a divorce. Divorce? Chris chuckled dismissively. Don't be ridiculous. You really want our child to grow up fatherless? He paused, turning to look at me when he saw determination on my face expression. He shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. He walked over, scooping me up and dropping me on the bed like he was doing me a favor there. All right, just stay in bed and rest. You'll be fine by morning. I said nothing, watching him leave. Once he was gone, I pulled out my phone and scheduled an abortion for the next day. I couldn't do this anymore. I had to take control of my own life. Ignoring the pain in my ankle, I hobbled to the freezer, grabbed a washcloth, and chilled it until it was cold enough to use as a makeshift ice pack. I pressed it against my swollen ankle, tears streaming down my face. If he wouldn't take care of me, then I'd take care of myself. I didn't sleep a wink that night. It wasn't like I was waiting for him. I just couldn't. But just like what I had in mind, Chris didn't come home at dawn. Just as the sky began to lighten, a message from an unknown number came in. There were several photos, all of Chris. He was shirtless, love bites clearly visible on his neck, holding around a 5-year-old boy in his arms. The boy clutched a picture book while Chris read to him, his face gentle and relaxed, the very image of a doting father. I didn't need to ask who had sent the pictures. A moment later, a message came through. Fern. He really is a great dad, isn't he? My vision went blur as rage churned in my gut. I didn't reply and I blocked the number instead. At noon, I went to the hospital alone and had the abortion. My body was weak after the procedure and I had to rest for the entire afternoon before I could manage to walk without feeling like I'd collapse. Lying there in the sterile room, I had plenty of time to think. I was pondering about the loss and gain I had in the way. I didn't want my child to be born into a family poisoned by conflict. Bringing a baby into a world full of shouting parent and deceit would mean giving them a childhood starved of stability and love. If that was the life I could offer, then perhaps not giving birth was the more responsible choice. I refused to bury my head in the sand, pretending to be happy with a husband who had betrayed me, pretending that everything was okay while drowning in lies. I decided to let go of Chris for good. I would spend the rest of my life learning how to love myself. When I finally left the hospital, hobbling down the steps on my weak state, I saw him. Chris standing there like the universe's cruel joke, holding a little boy in one arm and gripping a woman's hand with the other. It was Fern, of course, the woman who had stolen everything from me. They looked like a happy little family, a picture-perfect trio standing in the afternoon sunlight. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh that echoed off the hospital walls. It was all so pathetic, so cliché. What a lovely family, I said, slow claps punctuating each word, my voice filled with a cold, empty amusement. Chris's head snapped up and I watched the panic flash across his face before he quickly let go of Fern's hand. He looked at me with a frown, his eyes narrowing. Elodie, what are you doing here? Elodie, what are you doing here? Chris's face turned pale when he saw me standing at the hospital exit. I, on the other hand, didn't flinch. Not when he dropped Fern's hand. Not when he adjusted the boy in his arms, pretending the scene I'd just walked in on didn't exist. The smile he wore a moment earlier wasn't for me, and it hadn't been for a long time. Elodie, what are you doing here? he asked, his voice trying and failing to sound calm. I took a few slow, unsteady steps forward. My body was still sore from the procedure. The ache in my lower abdomen pulsed with each step. I hadn't come to confront him. I had only wanted to leave quietly. But the universe seemed to have other plans. I had an appointment, I said flatly. You know, the one you were supposed to take me to. He shifted the child to the other arm, avoiding my eyes. Fern stood stiffly beside him, her hand still hovering close to his elbow. The way her posture subtly leaned into his made me sick. She didn't tell me you'd be here, he muttered. Of course not, I said. Why would she ruin the perfect little family photo? Chris frowned, his expression growing defensive. Don't make this a scene. I let out a bitter laugh. A scene? This isn't a scene, Chris, it's a mirror. You just don't like what's being reflected back at you. Fern cleared her throat quietly, murmuring something to Tony, who clung tighter to Chris's shoulder. You've moved on, I said, nodding toward them. Congratulations, you finally get to play daddy like you always wanted. Elodie, I cut him off. No, I'm done talking. I just came to say goodbye. I walked past them without another word. I didn't cry, I didn't collapse, I didn't scream or beg, I just walked. But I could feel his eyes on my back, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I hoped they were filled with regret, because mine were empty. Elodie, wait! The urgency in Chris's voice cut through the wind. I didn't want to stop. I had nothing left to say. But my legs, weak and still trembling from the anesthesia and emotional exhaustion, gave out before my pride could stop me. He caught up to me just as I stumbled near the parking lot's curb. Elodie, please, just listen. I whirled around. Listen to what? Another excuse? Another version of the same story where you're the hero who's just trying to help a poor, helpless Fern? He looked stricken, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. He probably thought I'd crumble, that I'd fall into his arms, desperate to be chosen again. You don't understand, he said softly. I never meant for things to get like this. Like what? I snapped. You mean where I end up walking myself into a hospital to terminate a pregnancy because the father of my child couldn't be bothered to show up? His mouth opened, closed. You had the abortion? Yes. Chris took a step back, like the words physically pushed him. No, Elodie, you didn't. I didn't blink. I did. He stood there, stunned. You didn't even talk to me first. I laughed, dry and bitter. Talk to you? When? In between your bedtime stories and emergency visits to Fern's house? His jaw clenched. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. A long silence stretched between us. Only the sound of cars passing by and a gust of wind filled the void. I loved that baby, he said quietly. Then you should have shown up for him. I turned again, slower this time. My legs were weaker now, but I walked away anyway, and he didn't follow. Not that day. The next few days were a haze of painkillers, silence, and healing. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't respond to texts. I didn't check social media. The only connection I had to the outside world was the occasional food delivery and the sound of rain tapping the windows. But it didn't take long for the quiet to be interrupted. On the third day, a knock came to the door. I didn't answer. Then came another. Then another. The fifth time, the delivery guy dropped off roses, 24 of them wrapped in red silk and tagged with a note in Chris's familiar handwriting. Forgive me. I threw them in the trash without even reading the rest. The next day it was lilies, then orchids, each bouquet more extravagant than the last. Along with them came handwritten notes, pleas for forgiveness, promises to make things right, quotes from our wedding vows. Words that had once made my heart flutter now felt like weights pressing on my chest. Then came the voice messages. First polite, then desperate, always ending the same way. Please, Elodie, just talk to me. But I didn't want to talk. What would I even say? That I still remembered the sound of Fern's voice calling him daddy? That I still had nightmares of falling in the snow, clutching my stomach, wondering if my baby would survive? On the fifth day, I opened the door to get the mail and found him sitting on the hallway floor, back against the wall like a man who had nowhere left to go. He stood up when he saw me. Elodie. I closed the door before he could finish, because I didn't want regret at my doorstep. I wanted peace. But peace, I was learning, doesn't come when you ask for it. It comes when you make space for it. And Chris wasn't space. He was noise. Noise I had finally learned how to silence. On the seventh day, I returned from my follow-up appointment. My steps slow, deliberate. I was drained, not just from the procedure, but from carrying grief like a second skin. When I turned the corner to my apartment building, I saw him again. Chris, standing in the rain as if that made him more pitiful, as if the water dripping from his suit could wash away what he'd done. He held a bouquet in his hand, now soggy and pathetic, I nearly turned around and walked the other way. But he spotted me. "Elodie," he said, voice hoarse. I didn't answer. I walked past him, but his footsteps followed. "Please, just talk to me. 1 minute. That's all I'm asking." I stopped in front of the door, spine straight. "Fine. 1 minute." He stepped in front of me, eyes frantic, words tumbling out. "I've been thinking nonstop. About us. About the baby. About what I threw away. I know I was wrong. I was weak. I was confused. But I love you. I always have." I stared at him. This man who used to make my heart race. Now he barely stirred a reaction. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we lost the baby?" I asked. "You told me I was being dramatic, that I sprained my ankle on purpose, that Fern needed you more." Chris's face crumpled. "I was angry. I didn't mean it. You meant every word." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Our wedding ring. Mine. I kept it. I couldn't look at it, but I couldn't let it go either. I looked at the ring, then at him. "Why now? Why do you want me now?" He didn't answer. But I already knew. Because Fern had gotten what she wanted. Because the fantasy had cracked. Because the baby that kept me tied to him was gone. "Go home, Chris," I said softly. "Wherever that is for you now." His hand dropped. The ring fell to the wet pavement with a soft clink. He didn't pick it up, and I didn't look back as I walked inside. After that night, the rain stopped. But Chris didn't. He came back the next morning with dry clothes and hollow eyes, the bouquet replaced by 2 cups of coffee from the cafe where we used to meet for weekend breakfasts. He knocked, waited, knocked again. I didn't open. By the second visit, he brought pastries. By the third, a scrapbook. Our wedding. Our honeymoon. The ultrasound photo tucked between pages like a promise he never kept. I didn't open the door. But I watched through the peephole as he stood there for 15 minutes, flipping through memories he hadn't cared about until he lost them. A week passed. Then 2. Then he changed strategies. Instead of knocking, he sat on the stairs across the hall. Every day. For hours. Reading a book, playing soft music from his phone, whispering things I couldn't quite make out through the door. One afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear to the wood and caught his voice. "I remember the first time I saw you laugh," he said. "Really laugh. You were barefoot, dancing on the kitchen tiles, singing off-key. You looked so alive, and I think I loved you most in that moment." My chest tightened, because I remembered that night too. But memories don't fix broken promises. So I stayed quiet, and he stayed persistent. But I wasn't melting this time. I wasn't folding. I was healing. And healing doesn't look like second chances for people who only come back when they're lonely. I needed more than apologies, more than coffee and photo albums and rain-soaked regrets. I needed to learn how to live without the echo of his voice in every room. And for the first time, I was starting to believe I could. It was on a Monday morning that I finally found clarity. I woke up not to a knock, not to a bouquet or another note slid under my door, but to sunlight. Gentle, unfiltered, spilling across my bed like a blessing. For the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone. I didn't open the blinds to see if he was there. I just sat still. And in the quiet, I heard it. Peace. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle. Soft. It felt like breathing without choking. Like silence that didn't scream. Like being alone without being abandoned. That morning, I wrote him a letter. Not to beg, not to explain, just to close the chapter. I slid it under his door later that day. I don't know when he picked it up, but I never got a reply. I didn't need one. A week later, the flowers stopped. The music faded. The staircase across from mine sat empty. And then came spring. New buds on my balcony. A neighbor's dog barking joyfully. Kids laughing on their way to school. Life blooming again, even around the cracks. One afternoon, I passed by the cafe Chris and I used to frequent. I didn't go in. I didn't pause. I just smiled. Because I realized that grief and healing can sit in the same body, and sometimes they have coffee together. It took me a long time to let go of the version of me who waited, who hoped, who believed that if I just loved harder, he'd come back different. But now I know better. Love is not meant to be begged for. It is meant to be returned, so I gave it back to myself. And with that, I finally walked forward, free.